Coming up, let's talk Nic Claxton, Cam Thomas, and Dorian Finney-Smith, how three players in very different positions with the Brooklyn Nets could hold the keys to a successful Nets offseason. We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here in the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I am Adam Armbeck. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are free on all those great platforms and say, hey, game off. We got to talk more about Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. So download Monopoly Go now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. And where our game is on is not going to involve the NBA playoffs. At the time of this recording, late on a Wednesday night, we've got the Mavericks and Clippers. They're underway in the first quarter of action. We also saw the Miami Heat officially get bounced by the Boston Celtics. Seemed like that was going to be the case, losing by about, 1,000 there in that game as well. So Boston moves on. A lot of teams in the Eastern Conference have seen themselves successfully get out of that first round with relative ease. Meanwhile, tomorrow night, we're going to have what has been one of the best, first round series, certainly, as we saw Philadelphia get that win on the road. Knicks, 76ers, that's going to be a fun one to watch. This Dallas LA Clippers series has been one of the more fun first round series to watch as well. So a lot of good stuff going around the NBA playoffs. Doesn't have anything to do with the Brooklyn Nets, not at least on a ground level. And that's why I want to talk about the contract, more information, kind of getting speculated around where Nic Claxton stands. Also have some numbers on extensions for a player like Day'ron Sharpe, if the Nets are still going to keep him in the fold. A player like Cam Thomas, that's a big talking point too. And why a player like Dorian Finney-Smith matters in the spectrum of how the Nets approach this offseason, and those conversations with Sean Marks suggesting, yes, the Nets do want to get into this draft if at all possible. We'll give you a trade scenario there as well. On Nic Claxton to start, we've said now, going back to the Jordi Fernandez introductory press conference, and Doug, when we circled back up together, because I discussed that solo initially, said he wasn't so sure. Listen, you say all the right things in front of the microphones, but it doesn't really change what happens later in the offseason. And frankly, when you go over and you start to see some of the numbers now that maybe are getting thrown out for Nic Claxton, it probably would give you some pause. Maybe would give the Brooklyn Nets some pause. Initially, we thought, well, has his market come down? Nic Claxton still a really solid player for the Nets. You talk about him being, as a lot of the current roster is, well, a great piece to have if you have a superstar talent ahead of him, or if this roster reconstructs in a little bit of a different way going forward. Saw him play with Noah Clowney down the stretch of the season and like the sample size that we got. But now, when you hear that Michael Scotto is reporting, through my conversations, quoting here with executives, I'd say he remains around that $20 million figure annually. I think $25 million would be his ceiling as of now. The $25 million part would be a concerning number, right? I've seen from fans, whether on YouTube, over on X, when we've talked about, hey, like, I think you should keep Nic Claxton in the fold here. And I don't think that it's prohibitive or punitive in terms of impacting what this organization does in the grand scheme of things if you bring him back on a contract and then make different choices a year or two from now. That being said, though, just on its face value, upwards of 25 million being the ceiling, if that market were still to develop. We've heard a few teams get mentioned. OKC seemed a little bit hotter at another point. Golden State Warriors have been another team thrown out there. I think that that's an interesting potential fit there. The question I would have when we talk about those kind of numbers is just, how do you structure the contract, right? Now, we've already said, listen, the Cam Johnson one, for as reasonable as it may be seen at the time, all those incentives that aren't going to get matched, we know it's descending money over the life of the contract. 25 million. I mean, we all get it. Average AAV of 25. So you're talking a 4-year, $100 million deal. I would have a really hard time sliding that contract across the table. But even if you say something like 90 million, right? 90 million over 4 years, you're talking about 22 and a half. That's still a really big number. But if you're the Brooklyn Nets and you look at it from the perspective of, we know the Ben Simmons money is going to come off the books. So let's say that we give Nicholas Claxton 25 million in year number 1. But then thereafter, you have that 75 million and you continue to try to move that down the line. So if 90 million is the ultimate figure, give him the big money in that first year of the contract, because let's be honest, the first year of his contract and the next season for the Brooklyn Nets is not the most important one, not at least by the way we discuss it here on this podcast. We believe next offseason is going to be the big move for the Brooklyn Nets when it comes to going and getting star X or Y, spending on the free agent market, etc. So if you only have 65 million over the last 3 years of a contract like that, which gets you down to 21.5 million ish, and then do it again. Second year of the contract, we're going to give you 23 and move that number a little bit lower, a little bit lower. So by the time you get to the last 2 years of his deal, you're going to be talking about something in the neighborhood of 18-ish million per. I'm not telling you that I would 100% sign on the dotted line for that, but the idea being that you keep an asset under control that will still have value over the next 2 and 3 seasons. And if you take some of the bigger hit on the front end, then on the back end of it, you're holding a nice piece at a reasonable price that other teams would find attractive. So this is one of those instances where you try to do the both and, right? You try to keep a player that, again, I like. I think his game can still continue to grow a little bit here. You're not going to maybe get everything that we hoped he would develop into, but I wouldn't mind seeing him with Noah Clowney and seeing what these pairings can look like. And then ultimately, if another season or two from now, just like we talk about anybody, including Mikal Bridges, if it doesn't look like it's going in the right direction for the team overall, you still have valuable pieces that you can make moves with and continue to try to improve your ability, your flexibility to go out and get those big stars if that's the direction you want to go. So there's an interesting note about his contract there. When you talk about ceiling being 25 million, that gave me a real pause. You know, I was thinking if we're saying 20 million is the ceiling and maybe we find him more around 18, right? If I say $90 million over 4 years, I probably think that's still too high for a contract to give to Nicholas Claxton. But understanding the money is only going to escalate, the new TV money is going to keep coming in here for the NBA. So all these figures are going to start to look a little bit better as it progresses along. Fascinating to watch where that goes, though, and to see what do we hear from the Brooklyn Nets as we work our way through this offseason. We heard Jordi Fernandez speak very highly of Nicholas Claxton. Heard Sean Mark say we hope to have him back in Brooklyn. Ultimately, it's going to come down to not only what that contract looks like, what the market looks like for Nicholas Claxton, but sign and trade options are still on the table here as well. Something that we'll get into a little bit deeper in the offseason as it rolls along. What would be attractive sign and trade situations for the Brooklyn Nets when you hear some of the potential suitors out there on the market for Nicholas Claxton services? Maybe the Golden State Warriors are an interesting one to take a look at there. Coming up in a second, though, there's another player inside of this Brooklyn Nets team. No, not Cam Thomas just yet, though we will talk about him. Day'ron Sharpe, a couple of contract predictions for rookie extension eligible players, 2 key ones. Day'ron Sharpe, even more importantly, Cam Thomas. Why the Brooklyn Nets will likely wait to offer an extension to Cam Thomas. We'll dive into that coming up here in just one moment. First, though, got to tell you, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Getting on the playoff action, why don't you, right? You could, if you wanted to, as so many Knicks fans have. Get onto GameTime, grab your tickets for that game down in Philadelphia, take a little drive, right? Head over to Philly, catch just a great NBA atmosphere game, even if you don't want the Knicks to advance. You got to respect a good first round matchup. You know that the last minute ticket deals we talk about, you can save up to 60% buying last minutes for not only sports games like the Sixers and the Knicks, but also for concerts, comedy, theater, anything else. Flash deals where you can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of a game or event. The all-in pricing, you can toggle this feature on to show you upfront exactly what you're going to be paying, so there's no surprise fees at checkout. And of course, GameTime ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA, for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. And as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, taking a look at the offseason and why this is critical. Okay, so the Brooklyn Nets could choose to invest in Nic Claxton, not only in the short term for this team, but also in the long term as a valuable asset, maybe to facilitate a trade down the road, maybe to be an attractive player in packages that they want to look at. Another big factor here, though, especially when it comes to Nic Claxton, and then also extending inside of this offseason for the Brooklyn Nets, is going to be what they do with two other key players. Now, why did I mention Day'ron Sharpe in this before we end up talking about the other big piece, which is going to be Dorian Finney-Smith, trade scenario with the Memphis Grizzlies? Why do it? Why get maybe a young player, maybe salary matching? We'll talk about that coming up. But when you look at some of the key players that are going to be up for extensions, not just the Brooklyn Nets, but league wide, Bleacher Report put out an article a couple of days ago here. Want to give credit where it's due. Eric Pincus wrote this one up here for them. Contract extension predictions for the 2024 NBA rookie scale players. Now, we're going to get to Cam Thomas and focus in on him here in a second. But just as a footnote to the Nic Claxton decision, the 30th player that they talk about is going to be Aldama for the Memphis Grizzlies, but they're at 29. Is a player that we talk about, then kind of forget about because there's some injuries. There's also kind of his role gets diminished. He doesn't have the next step for his career that we maybe thought he was going to, and that's Day'ron Sharpe. He currently 55 game average, right? Not a starter, coming off the bench, 15 minutes, 7 points, 6.5 rebounds, and obviously the field goal percentage, a little bit below 60 there is what it is going to operate in around the basket. Saw him try to take some of those 3-point looks, some of the perimeter shooting to go down here. Now, the interesting one here was that Okongwu would be one of the comp levels in terms of productive in the third year. Not quite on that level, not quite on the level of an Isaiah Stewart, but something in that type of range. So expectations here in this one says Sharpe's agent might want the MLE level salary for him projected around $13.5 million for 2025-26, but perhaps a compromise could be made in the $10 to $11 million range annually. So if you are not going with the Nic Claxton version of this, and these two players are not the same, and it's not a one-to-one. However, if the Brooklyn Nets say, well, 23, 24 million for Nic Claxton was just too rich for our blood, we wish nothing but the best. Again, maybe a sign and trade option. Now you're going to go in-house, and you're going to look at a player like Day'ron Sharpe. Is he worth 10 or 11 million dollars, a 3-year, 30 to 35, 36 million dollar contract? Well, from a rebounding standpoint, he certainly is. You bring him in off the bench, almost no one is better on a per minute basis from a rebounding standpoint than Day'ron Sharpe. The question is, do we think that under Jordi Fernandez and a little bit of this new direction, are we going to see a better commitment to that perimeter shot that sometimes flashes? And we're not expecting Day'ron Sharpe to all of a sudden become a 38, 39% three-point shooter, but a guy that can knock down on a more consistent volume 34, 35% and be a stretch big in that form that we have not seen for the Brooklyn Nets in quite some time, that does offer you some different opportunities, especially if we think that Noah Clowney is going to be a key contributor to this team going forward here. So just a little footnote on his money. The more important name here, obviously, when we talk about this offseason, is Cam Thomas. And I found inside of this article it to be a fascinating little write-up when we get to Cam Thomas. He's the 27th on this list. And obviously we know, right? Stymied, stuck on the bench, can't find a consistent role. Finally this year, right? He's averaging 57 games, 42 starts. But we know essentially that's going to be closer to 70-plus games based with injuries and otherwise, and it's going to be almost all starts. That's what the real averages are. But averaging over 30 minutes a game, averaging almost 22 points a game, giving you 3 rebounds, knocking down 36% from deep. This was an interesting one to me. So they offer up this comp about coming off after 3 seasons and really breaking out. San Antonio, who when they had Vassell come up, they went with that as something in the range of 27 to 29 million per season. Now, at the time, as they note in the article here, San Antonio's payroll is among the lowest in the NBA, so you can afford to maybe overpay a little bit because you need to get yourself up to a certain threshold in terms of your salaries. It's not really damaging to overpay a player like Vassell. Certainly, expectations might be that Cam Thomas say, hey, I want the big bucks, and that the Nets are not going to be anywhere near that. The more important talking point coming out of this, as they note, Thomas may want to have that type of level of contract. However, the most important piece here, usually 2 things. 1, scorers averaging over 20 points per game in the NBA get around and above $20 million per year. So is that the benchmark that we're setting when we talk about Cam Thomas and his next contract? North of $20 million a year. That's an insane figure to kind of talk about and to throw out there. I'm not saying he's not worth it. I'm not saying that the production isn't worth it, but I don't think that he's perceived or viewed that way, at least right now, NBA wide, where all of a sudden you would thrust him into the 20 plus $1 million range. Now, that being the case, the other big factor here is they don't have to do this deal this year. And if you start to talk about, because by the way, fast forward a year from now and Cam Thomas repeats the exact same production and does some of the things that we've been talking about, the assist number starts to creep up a little bit, right? The consistency continues to kind of develop into that floor general at the point guard spot. Hey, now all of a sudden, when it comes time for that contract extension, it's not going to be hard to squint and see that value being closer to 20 than to whatever, 15. And by the way, when you go back and we talk about Nic Claxton and saying, well, is he worth 20 to $25 million? I know for a fact, if I asked you right now in the comments on YouTube, over on X, mention to us, who would you rather pay $20 million to, Nic Claxton or Cam Thomas? I would bet a significant amount of Doug Norrie's money that you would say pay Cam Thomas first. Not because you might not like Nic Claxton, just because he's of his production increase in this one season where he finally was given the opportunity to really showcase himself on the offensive end. That to me is fascinating. However, the Nets have the year to play with. So the likelihood of doing this extension this offseason seems slim. And the likelihood, as the Day'ron Sharpe situation mentioned, that they would go to him and say, Cam Thomas, that is, well, hey, why don't we go ahead? You know, the numbers might look like X based on your offensive production, but we'll go ahead and give it to you a year early if we get a little bit of a hometown discount. I don't see that being the case for Cam Thomas. I can very easily see that being the case for Day'ron Sharpe because it's stability, right? Hey, lock me up, give me the big pay bump here as a back end of the first round draft pick. This is an opportunity for make some real cash here and not have to worry about it going forward, get the money in my pocket a year in advance. For the Nets, it just makes more sense. Let's wait, get Ben Simmons money off the books, see what happens with Nic Claxton. Again, that's a key factor here. And then also look at the landscape. Who's available? Where are we going to spend our money? And what does that look like? In all of these instances, though, a big factor that gets mentioned as well is remember, sometimes you're paying player X just so that you have him in a hold for a future trade, because it's always about salary matching when it comes to maybe going and making a trade for a key player out on the market, a key disgruntled player. You want to say Donovan Mitchell. I want to say who knows? Could be anybody. Now people want to say maybe it's Devin Booker. Listen, you can throw any name you want out there. Bottom line is you're going to need to have some salary matching options on the books in order to facilitate those. Is that me telling you that I want them to trade Cam Thomas for player X, Y, or Z? No. But it is an idea of what the Brooklyn Nets front office is going to walk through this offseason. And yes, whether or not Nic Claxton comes back and what his contract looks like will impact potentially the Nets' in-house decision to re-up with Day'ron Sharpe as a bench player that can rebound the heck out of the ball, to re-up a year early with Cam Thomas and try to get him cemented as a part of the young core that is with the veterans like Mikal Bridges and Cameron Johnson now, but is also going to be a part of this team going forward. And I wondered if philosophically that would be something that the Nets want to do here. When you hear the way Jordi Fernandez talks about loving the young core, having a long runway, even though success is expected immediately, you feel good about being able to work, develop, and continue to grow with a young core of players. Well, if that's the narrative you're selling, then locking these guys in now isn't the worst idea in the world. And it doesn't mean you can't make different decisions down the road, but it would certainly offer a sense of stability in the short term. And that, by the way, includes Mikal Bridges and includes Cameron Johnson, for better or worse, how you feel about them right now. It would include them because now you're another year and two away from saying, well, what is Mikal Bridges' situation? Is there going to be an extension offer? Is he going to be traded, right? So you start to try to set these up on slightly overlapping timelines where you always have valuable assets on the books for long stretches, where you have maybe expiring deals that offer value. And you also have the age gaps here, supplemented by the draft, supplemented by looking out at the free agent market, supplemented by keeping an eye on what stars maybe are ready to make a switch in terms of where they play. So those are the numbers that we see. Maybe a ceiling of $25 million for Nic Claxton. Yikes. Maybe a kind of a friendly bench roll deal for Day'ron Sharpe, $10 million. It's insane to talk about $10 million not seeming like a lot of money. It is to me. but maybe not a big deal if you want to keep that player on the bench for this team. And then the Cam Thomas of it all. Fascinating to watch and to hear what else gets said. The other big component of this is going to be one Dorian Finney-Smith. Yes, still a veteran, still on this team, still has some time left on his contract. Let's talk about a proposed trade with the Memphis Grizzlies, a couple of versions of it, and why it would matter relative to the Brooklyn Nets maybe wanting to get back into the 2024 draft. We'll go ahead and tie a nice little bow on that conversation coming up next. All right, game off. We got to pause here and talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. We talked about that already at the top, but there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with your friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, and there's so much to get. Unique stickers that you can trade with your friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the board with, and of course, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton is included in their unique mini games like digging for treasures or robot pachinko machines. And of course, there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover on Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now for free on Google Play or in the App Store. Game on. All right, so as we tie a bow on these critical off-season decisions that are coming down the pike for the Brooklyn Nets, we've talked about some of these narratives, what's going to happen, what could happen. Another one is Dorian Finney-Smith, because ultimately when you look at this team and we say, where are the big decisions, as we mentioned, Nic Claxton, the Cam Thomas, obviously far less to Day'ron Sharpe, but notable just like the percentage of the roster and the cap space that he could occupy if the Nets choose to keep him around. Again, those numbers seem a little bit high to me, if we're just being totally clear for Day'ron Sharpe, but who knows? It's hard to get a gauge on, one, where the Nets stand on some of these players, and two, where the market would stand on them as well. However, Dorian Finney-Smith, as we know, fourth highest player on the roster, by the way, this past season, 14.9 million. And then, of course, he has the player option 25-26 for around 15.4 million. So a proposed trade here. This came care of Nick Crane over on Nets Insider. Now, when you think about a trade package around Dorian Finney-Smith and a couple of options when it comes to the Memphis Grizzlies, whether or not this is the perfect match or whether or not other teams would be more interested, that's neither here nor there. But you have ideas like talking about Luke Kennard and Brendan Clark, who are on similar salaries for the upcoming season. You could go ahead and say, yes, we're also going to need a draft pick X or another young prospect potentially to make this thing work. But that's the one version of it. One-to-one salaries. If Memphis thinks that that's an upgrade for them and the Nets think we can get enough value out of this in return. The other one that I like, though, a little bit more is when you talk about combining multiple salaries rather than just Luke Kennard or just Brendan Clark. You look at Conchar or you look at Zaire Williams. So 6.1 and 6.1. Oh, sorry, same thing. 6.1 million respectively on their contracts. That gets you pretty close. So yeah, you're still going to have to maybe throw something else in to make the money match, or you're going to talk about, are we looking at a draft asset coming back our way in this process as well? A lot of this is predicated on by Nick Crane saying that, hey, Vince Williams Jr., G.G. Jackson, right? Young players. We feel like we have that part of our core set up here, and that's what makes a still young player in Zaire Williams available. I'm not even overly concerned about whether or not it's veteran player X on a one-to-one salary match or if it's a young piece. That doesn't bother me or interest me as much as the conversation around getting another draft asset in the board and getting the Nets back into the draft conversation in 2024. Now, when you go over on Tankathon, obviously, we understand we're talking about the opportunity potentially right now, Memphis Grizzlies 7th in the lottery odds. So what's going to happen with that? We'll wait and see. It's going to be somewhere up there high. And no, the Brooklyn Nets are not going to get that pick out of the Memphis Grizzlies for Dorian Finney-Smith. They also have one that goes back down a little bit further here that they'll be sending out as well. That is in the later rounds. Trying to remember where we actually had this one here. Oh, I thought I had it listed. Well, and the Nets have the swap there as well with them as well, somewhere in the mix. So you're going to lose track of that one too. Going back in the second round, excuse me. So the Timberwolves will have the pick, 37th overall. That comes care of the Memphis Grizzlies. The Memphis Grizzlies will have the 39th pick overall. That comes care of the Brooklyn Nets. Why would this be of interest to the Nets? Well, right now they don't have any picks at all. And we've heard Sean Marks talk about wanting to get back in the mix. That's part one of it. And this is probably only step one of a bigger process, because whether or not the Nets sit there and say, we like one of these players that you're throwing out here in this, could be Luke Kennard. I don't think the Nets are going to want to keep him. Do I think they would pass him through to get another draft pick? Yes, I do. Can they get themselves a couple of picks that are in the second round high up enough that you combine them, that you pass through another player, and you say, let's get back to the back end of the first round? Specifically, let's get back into the first round here, maybe for a player like Carlton Carington out of Pittsburgh, the point guard product, 6'5", 190-pounder, who's gone anywhere. Back into the first round, early second round. It's still a long way to go between now and draft night. But if I'm going to look at a player who, even though it's 6'5" on Tankathon, 6'6" over on NBADraft.net, let's go with the bigger number because we like that more. Why do I like him? Because he's only 18 years old. He'll barely almost be 19 at the time of the draft. Okay, young players, young core. Let's get another young possible prospect in here to get into the backcourt alongside of Cam Thomas. It offers you some versatility. You have a combo guard with good size, good physical attributes, unselfish player, wants to set other people up here, and he's an excellent passer and playmaker. Okay, so now all of a sudden I give myself some viability about what do I want to do in the backcourt. Dennis Schroeder is still going to be here in the upcoming season. Great. Ben Simmons is playing himself out on this contract. Fine. If I can find a way to get myself back into this draft conversation and grab a young talent that I have a 1 or 2 year runway on developing and seeing if he could fit into our backcourt and be a nice tandem piece with Cam Thomas, I jump at the opportunity. I jump at the opportunity to do it, because Dorian Finney-Smith is not going to be a part of the success track here in the short term. I don't believe. We can talk about whether or not they go and get Donovan Mitchell or they go and get a Devin Booker or player X, Y, or Z. And yes, Dorian Finney-Smith is going to be more valuable in those situations than he is right now to the Nets. But even then, you already see with Noah Clowney on the come up here, with Jalen Wilson showing that he can be a rotational contributor, with certainly a big old question mark around Dariq Whitehead, but at least hopefully some optimism that he'll be in training camp and he'll be in the summer league and be in G League and showing you he can be healthy and play. And then all of a sudden we're talking about that stealing a later round pick who really would have been top 10 if healthy the year prior, right? All those things we mentioned at the time of the draft of Dariq Whitehead. You have to think about the future here. And sending off Dorian Finney-Smith, which isn't a hard sell for the fan base, to get a couple of assets, to be able to move around the board a little bit and just grab a player. Take another dart throw, as we refer to them on this show, because it means maybe another year from now, you all of a sudden have 4, 5, or 6 guys that all contribute to what this team is at all different levels. Elite talent scorer like Cam Thomas, bench contributor like Jalen Wilson. That's fine. You're going to need it at every single part and every single position on this team. So I found that interesting to start that conversation about what does it look like. The reason why Memphis is a hard one is because you're probably thinking more about the players or more about a multi-step process to get yourself into the conversation around having a first round pick, right? Because Memphis at 7, not going to be as viable. However, notable here, after the lottery, okay, so Miami is out. We'll wait to see what happens with Philadelphia. The Lakers are out. Their pick is going to the Pelicans. You also have Cleveland or Orlando is going to be out. One of the two. Milwaukee is now going to be out. So you're talking about that pick also going to the Pelicans. They flip-flop at 21 and a 23. But when you start to set that board, Phoenix out. So their pick is going to rise a little bit from where it currently sits at 22, just based on the teams that advance in the second round. Once this shuffle finish is happening, you could be talking about 2 or 3 key teams that are actually in the middle of the first round. The Lakers, the Phoenix Suns, the Milwaukee Bucks, Cleveland or Orlando, any of these teams. I'm not talking about perfect fits for Dorian Finney-Smith, but the conversation around teams that want a veteran player is a little bit more enticing when they've had quote unquote bad playoff seasons. These are good teams that got bounced out by other good teams, especially when you look out in the West. So I find that absolutely fascinating as we watch the way these playoffs unfold and start to have that part of the conversation. It was a nice job by Nick Crane mentioning the Memphis Grizzlies, who have had ties to Dorian Finney-Smith before, had conversations tied to Mikal Bridges going back to the last season after the initial trade with Kevin Durant. So all these wheels are turning on a very high level. You've got $20 million contracts potentially to hand out to Nic Claxton. You have rookie eligible extensions that you could look into depending on how your cap feels on that coming off of that Claxton choice. And then you also have money to be moved, right? $14-15 million of movable cap space in Dorian Finney-Smith. These are things that the Nets do control. We talked a bit as the playoffs have gone on, things outside of Brooklyn that could have an impact on what they choose to do. This is stuff inside. This is all in-house decisions that they get to make here. And they can set their own table about how we look at their offseason, their draft board, their training camp, and the upcoming year ahead. So a lot of fun things to set table with there. Want to spend a little bit internal, a little less external. If you didn't go check out our episode yesterday, please do. We talked about LeBron James, talked about Kevin Durant, these older superstar talents that are maybe coming to the end of their roads, big shakeups that could be happening here. Little misconception around the discussion we were having. It wasn't about the Brooklyn Nets going and getting LeBron James. It was just about seeing the landscape shift here in the NBA and wondering if more players shake loose here, if there's more of a movement in the offseason for a lot of players, the Nets can dance in that at the superstar level or maybe at the mid-tier level. They can recalibrate their roster a little bit. So that's all part of what the Nets need to do here this off season. We'll continue to break things down. Doug will be in tomorrow talking about the outcome of tonight's Dallas game against the Clippers, most likely. And then who knows what else will be off the top of his head. We keep being here for you 5 days a week over on YouTube, over on X, at Adam Armbrecht, at Doug Norrie, at Locked On Nets. Subscribe, turn on the alerts, do all those great things because you help this show and hopefully you help yourself. Season and off season is long, but we're here for you all summer long. That being the case, as you guys know, when there is no Doug Norrie, there is no quote short of saying that I miss my friend. And I can't wait till he's back so we can keep talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball.